Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem, welcome, Boachem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bless me, O angels, Barfuli L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And eventually we'll say goodbye to these angels who are with us. Say L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One last time, ya la la, ya la la, ya la 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 la, ya la la la, ya la 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 Shabbat Shalom to those of you who are here live. Shabbat Shalom to our folks on Zoom and YouTube Live. We're glad you're here. Thank you for making our minyan and davening with us and making this so meaningful. Let's bless our candles. We have our candles lit. Let's all rise for a moment and we'll say our candle blessing that'll usher us into Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. We wish you a peaceful and meaningful and deep Shabbat. You may be seated. We turn to page 15. L'chu neranena. L'chu neranena l'Adonai nariya letzor yishenu v'kadma fanav v'toda b'zmirot nariya lo. Read to the bottom of the page. Our ancestors in the desert had a hard time keeping the faith. And here we are, trying our hardest. Arba'im shana akut bedor, Omar am to'e levavim, hem lo yadu derachai, asher nishbati be'apim, Ivon el menuchati. We can start by singing a new song. Shiru l'Adonai, shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruch shemo, basru miyom yom yeshuato, sapru v'goyim kevodo b'chol ha'amim, nifleotav v'gadol Adonai. bottom, Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. V'tageh haaretz. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. V'tageh haaretz. Yiram hayam, yiram hayam, yiram hayam, melo. Yiram hayam, yiram hayam, yiram hayam, melo. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. V'tageh haaretz. Yalos Vadai v'chol asher bo, az yiradenu kol etzeyar. Lifnei Adonai kiva, kiva lishbot haaretz. Yishbot tevel b'tzedek ve'amim b'emunato. 17. Adonai malach, tageh haaretz yismechu rabim. Manan brachas. Ohave Adonai sinura, shomer nafshot chasidav, miyad reshaim yatzilem, or zaru ala tzadik, b'lishrei lev simcha, simchu tzadikim b'Adonai, behodu lezecher kodsho. 18. Shir l'Adonai shir chadash, ki niflaot asach, shal yimino zro kodsho. Yiram hayam umlo tevel v'yosh v'vah neharotim chauchaf yachad harim yiranenu lifnei Adonai kiva lishbot haaretz yishbot tevel b'tzedek ve'amim b'mesharim. Adonai malach seated. Lechando di likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lechando di likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor b'zachor b'dibur echad, Ishmianu el hamiuchad Adonai echad u'shemo echad l'shem tiferet v'letiva. Lecha dodi, lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, Mekor hamiracha v'rosh mikedem nesucha, sof ma'aseh v'machshavat tchila. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech u'melucha, u'mitzei mitoch ha'pecha, Kabbalat Shabbat b'yemek habacha, v'hu yachamol alayichem la. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Itma'ari me'afar kumi, livshi bigdei tifartecha mi, al yad ben yishai b'talachmi, korba el nafshi ge'ala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, Kiva orech umiori, uri, shir daberi, kavod Adonai alayivnika. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. We rise, we welcome the Sabbath bride. Ohi v'shalom ateret ba'ala, gam b'simcha u'b'tzola, toch emuneh am segula, boi chala. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Seated, page 23. Mizmor shir liyom haShabbat. Tova. Tzaddik Tamar Yifrach ke'erez balvanon yizke, shetulim beveit Adonai b'chatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu. Od yinuvun b'seva, teshenim v'rananim yihiyu, להגיד כי אשר אדוני צורי ולא עוולת בו. Page 24, אדוני מלך ולבש. עדותיך נאמנו מעלתך נאווה קודש, אדוני לאורך ימים.
Mourner's Kaddish, page 24.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
בעלמא דברה קירותי וימליך מלכותי. בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עולמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה. וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו. עושה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו
Amen.
amen. Let's all rise. We turn to page 28, and normally this is where Ken Levine would take over, but he's saving his voice, a little under the weather, and so subbing in for Ken Levine will be me. Page 28. Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam ba'ed, Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam ba'ed. You may be seated. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Thank you, God, for turning the seasons from light to dark and from dark to light. Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom ben laila, Adonai tzivaot shemo el chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu leolam ba'ed, Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim. Page 29, a prayer of love. Ahavat olam beit Yisrael amcha ahavta Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu v'shofreinu v'kumeinu nasiach bechukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha u'b'mitzvotecha le'olam ba'ed ki hem chayenu ve'orech yameinu ve'orech yameinu v'hem negeh yomam b'layla yomam b'layla Yehavatcha al tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, bechol levavcha ubechol nafshecha, v'chol me'odecha behayu hadivarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'beitecha u'belechtecha v'derech ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. והיה. Continue on page 30, page 31. Adonai Elohechem emet. Be'emunah kosot. Gamalin, page 32. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ובני ישראל לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות עושה פלא מלכותך ראו בניך בוקיים לפני משה זה אלי אנו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם בעד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלום יד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גל ישראל. Page 33, Ashkivenu. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom Hamidenu Malkeinu L'Chaim. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom Hamidenu Malkeinu L'Chaim. Ushmor Tzedteinu Uvoinu L'chaim Shalom L'chaim Shalom Me'ata v'ad olam Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom V'hamidenu Malkeinu L'chaim. Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu L'Shalom V'hamidenu Malkeinu L'chaim. Ufros aleinu sukat shlomecha, baruch ata Adonai, apores sukat shalom aleinu, vel kol amo Yisrael, v'al Yerushalayim. We rise, page 34. Mishameru b'nei Yisrael, et ha-Shabbat. לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם. כי ששת ימים עשה השמיים ואת הארץ וביום השביעי שבת וינפש יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה V'amadi rakirute v'amlich malchute b'chayechon uvyomechon uvchayedecho beit Yisrael ba'agala ba'agala ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן יהי שמירה במבורך לעולם ביומי אומיה יתברך יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תאמירן בעלמא באמרו אמן.
The Amidah, page 35.
As you turn to page 38, at the top of the page, we pray for peace. Shalom Rabba Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rabba Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech Adon Lecho hashalom, ki atahu melech Adon. Lecho hashalom, shalom Rabba Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rabba Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tov beinecha v'tov beinecha levarech et Amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. Shalom Rabba
Shabbat Shalom. So the bad news is, as the rabbi mentioned, I have a bit of the crud. I'm on my way towards the recovery. The good news is, what's the first thing you do when you get the crud today, in today's world? You go and get a COVID test. So I know I'm freshly tested, no COVID. Good news. One is tempted to refer to this week's parasha of Vayigash as, oh my gosh, due to the intensely emotional scene in which Joseph finally reveals himself to his brothers. Having listened to Judah's highly impassioned discourse concerning the plight of his brother Benjamin and hearing of his father, Joseph is unable to maintain his resolve. He has a sense that his brothers had indeed changed and might even feel remorse for what they did to him. He suddenly commands all of the Egyptians to leave the room and promptly announces to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still living? Now I want you to try and imagine yourself being one of the brothers in that room at that moment. 22 years have passed since you've seen or heard of Joseph. And now here he stands. The Torah itself tells us the brothers could not answer him because they were left dumbfounded before him. Stop and consider for a second what must have been going through the minds of these brothers. Joseph, a viceroy in Egypt, that brat, that overconfident little kid that we threw into a pit and that we sold to the Ishmaelites, a choice we made which sent our father into a continual state of mourning. That Joseph? That a heavy silence must have permeated the room is evinced by what Joseph says next. He says, come close to me, please. And they came close. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother. It is I whom you sold into Egypt. Well, so much for any pretense. The brothers' initial shock must have rapidly deteriorated into utter terror. What would be done to them in revenge? Would they be sold into slavery as fitting justice? Would Joseph even allow them to escape with their lives? And instead, Joseph comforts them. Aware of God's promise in his life, Joseph says to his brothers, and now be not distressed. Do not reproach yourself for having sold me here, because it was to be a provider that God sent me before you. Joseph affirms an understanding that he was sent before them for a momentous deliverance, declaring, it was not you who sent me, it was God. And the sense of relief experienced by the brothers must have been palpable. So all's well that ends well, but not so fast. In reflecting on this biblical tale, the rabbis slam on the brakes. Wait a minute. After 22 years of not making the slightest attempt to reach out to his father, and now Joseph wants to know, is he still alive? Through the entire period, that the multiple decade period, Jacob was a whopping 6-day camel ride away. He had been elevated to a position of influence, and Joseph couldn't dispatch a messenger. He couldn't have gone there himself. He couldn't have sent word. And now, after 22 years, he stands here weeping. What's wrong with this picture? The Al-Sheikh and the Midrash Tachuma provide us with one insight. These Midrashim suggest that Joseph understands these events as a fulfillment of the dream that he had back in Canaan, a dream in which all the sheaves of grain, all the stars of heaven, and ultimately all of his family would bow down before him. He recognizes that the entire purpose of the events of the last 2 decades was to teach him how to read and present dreams in preparation for this very moment. Remembering God's promise, God's prophecy to Abraham that his descendants would be strangers in a strange land, Joseph appreciated that it would be necessary for all to descend into Egypt. Picking up on Joseph's use of the phrase momentous deliverance, the Midrash Tanhuma suggests that instead of the children of Israel being schlepped to Egypt in chains after a destructive war, they would instead come as honored guests. They would come in comfort, their wealth intact, and soon to grow into a mighty nation. And so accordingly, to preemptively have sent word to Jacob prior to the groundwork being properly laid might have prevented the fulfillment of the destiny of God's prophecy. With things as they currently stand, the safety of the children of Israel will be assured for a while, allowing them to grow, allowing them to prosper before the events of the Exodus. The Torah informs us that Jacob had his doubts. But in a dream, God informs the patriarch, have no fear of descending into Egypt, for I will establish you as a great nation there. I will descend into Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you up, and Joseph shall place his hand on your eyes. This text is particularly loaded with the potential for tears of relief and tears of fulfillment. Joseph is reassured that the beloved son, the son that he had mourned for 22 years, will deeply impact the world. Then Jacob will live to see it, and in love, that Joseph will be there to honor him when he dies. But again, the story's not over. We learn of one more attempt at deception. The Torah tells us that Joseph instructs his family that when Pharaoh asks, "What do you do for a living?" they should respond, "We are cattlemen, as were our forefathers." Because in Egypt, shepherds were held in contempt. They were the lowest of the low. And accordingly, if the family wanted to settle in Goshen with its rich pasture lands, Joseph believes that yet one more deception is in order. And yet, when Pharaoh inquires of them, what do they do for a living? Jacob and his sons answer, "We are shepherds, as were our forefathers." And despite Joseph's fears, their request to settle in Goshen is granted anyway. Seemingly, Jacob is simply finished. He's finished with falsehoods. Throughout his life and throughout the life of his family, deception had resulted in one disaster after another, one heartache after another. The tales of Genesis evince family misleading one another time after time, a formula which serves as a recipe for strife and family dissolution. The time had come for truth. The time had come for a trust in God accompanied by a reunification of the family. May we, like Joseph, be blessed to recognize the hand of God in our lives and to comprehend, as did Jacob, the destructive power within our family and within our social dynamics of deception. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Shabbat Shalom.
We turn to page 47. Let's rise for Vayachulu. Now let's read it in the English, right? And give us our Shabbat charge and connect the earth and the world to this moment, page 47. The heavens and the earth and all they contain were completed. On the seventh day, God finished the work he had been doing and ceased on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and called it holy, because on it God ceased from all the work of creation, and so we rest just as God rests. Magen avot bidvaro mechayim metim b'mamaro ha'el hakadosh she'en kamohu hameniach le'amo b'yom Shabbat kodsho Kivam ratza lehaniach lahem. Kivam ratza lehaniach lahem. Lefanav na'avod b'yira v'fachad. V'nodeh lishmo b'chol yom tamid. Min habrachot. El hahoda'ot Adon Hashalom. Mekadesh HaShabbat Mubarech Shevi Umeniach Bidusha Le'am Bidushnei Oneg Zecher Lemase Bereshit 48 Eloheinu Elohei Avotenu Ritzei V'menuchatenu Kadshenu b'mitzvotecha v'ten chelkenu b'toratecha Sabenu mituvecha v'samchenu b'yeshuatecha v'taher libenu le'avdecha b'emet v'hanchilenu Adonai Eloheinu be'ahava uvratzon Shabbat kodshecha v'yanuchu v'Yisrael mikadeshei shemecha Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat Yitkadav Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Be'el Madi Raki Urtei V'mich Malchutei V'chaychon V'mechon V'chaychol Beit Yisrael V'agalat U'izman Kariv V'imeru Amen Yehi Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Le'olam Le'ol Le'omaya Yitbarach Yitbarach V'ishtabach V'yitbar B'Shemam V'yitnaseh V'yitadar B'Shlev V'lal Shmei Kudesha Richu Le'elam in kol birchata v'shirata Ata v'nechamata Ta'amiran be'alma v'imeru Amen Titkabel Satan Batahon Chol Yisrael Kadam Avahon V'Ishmaya v'imeru Amen Yehesh Lama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu B'Kol Yisrael v'imeru Amen Ose Shalom B'imromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru. Amen. 49. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho Be'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh v'reshit Shihu yom techila lemikra kodesh zecher litziat Mitzrayim kivanu bacharta Eotanu kidashta Mikol ha'amim V'shabat kodshecha Be'ahava uvratzon Inchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat Not bad, not bad. Aleinu l'shabeach l'Adon ha'peh 51 Ma'atei kedula liotzer b'reshit Shelo asanu kegoyei ha'aratzot V'lo samanu kemishpachot adama Shelo sam chelkeinu kahem V'gor aleinu kechol hamonam Anachnu kol משתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. השבותה אל לבביך, והשבותה אל לבביך, אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים. והשבותה אל לבביך, כי אדוני הוא האלוהים. ונאמר, היה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד, ושמו אחד.
You may be seated. We're saddened to announce the passing of Mona Schlachter. Tammy, and to the entire family, we send you our love, we send you hugs. Our hearts also go out to the families of those in Shloshim, of families of Martin Belasco, Michael Ginsberg, Dorothy Jacobs, and Fred Levine. On this Shabbat, we're observing the Yortzites of Solomon Abramson, Lucille Avruten, Jenny Belasco, Rita Cantor Bernstein, Judith Cohen, Gertrude Friedman, Ruth Garvin, Abe Ginsberg, Francis Goldstein, Nechama Hampel, Carmela Bernard Holbrook, Paul Howard, William Samuel Hurwitz, Francis Kamenetz, Samuel Katzen, Ruby Bluestein Kemble, Judith Lesser, Nassim Levy, Joyce Lilly, Dan Marom, Sam Merwin, Rose Weiss Oberman, Devara Pollock, Max Roche, Irving Samuels, Rose Schneider, Earl Schwartz, Marsha Sheena, Harley Seiper, Annette Skoll, Herman Sternberg, Bev Teitel, Otto Ullman, Benjamin Weiner, and Tilly Wolfthal. All those in a period of mourning, those observing a yahrzeit, we ask you to rise. The words of Mourner's Kaddish can be found on page 52.
יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה,
Amen.
בעלמא יברא קירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחיי חון וביומי חון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמא ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. Friends, you may be seated. Some announcements.
Yes, so this got a lot of adult ed going on, which is great. Tomorrow is the Inspired Book Club. They're reading My Father's Paradise, the discussion led by Marsha Hurwitz, and that'll be at 1 o'clock on Zoom. The morning minyan every day. Kaddish is recited Sunday through Friday at 9 o'clock a.m. on Zoom only. If you weren't able to join me on Thursday, please join me Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. We're looking at Red, White, and Jew. Thank you, Rabbi, for this title. Jewish civilization, and we're looking at, this week we'll be looking at the immigration experience of the early 1900s and the Shmata business and all that goes with that. CBS Adult Ed on Zoom a week from tomorrow, the Shabbat study group, Who Are the Sephardim Really? With Louisa Kluger, and that will again be at 1 o'clock on Zoom. Men's Club Blood Drive registration can be found in our weekly e-bulletin. And tomorrow morning, we reinstituted Kiddushes in the Sukkah. So please join us for services at 9:30. Join us for the Kiddush luncheon afterwards that follows. And we'll sit outside and we'll catch up with one another. Rabbi, a personal thank you for covering and singing tonight.
Yeah, of course, of course. And with the Ose Shalom, please join me. Ose Shalom Bimroma, Uya Ase Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, V'imru, Amen. Ose Shalom, Ose Shalom Bimroma, Uya Ase Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, V'imru, Shalom Bimroma, Uya Ase Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel, V'imru, Amen. We'll close with a priestly benediction. We rise, and our hearts go out to all of our loved ones, all of our family, all of our friends, our community, and beyond. Yivarechecha Adonai ve'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lachem shalom. Shabbat shalom. Thank you again for being here and making our minyan.
Berabim.
Shabbat shalom on live stream and who's ever there on Zoom. Do we have Zoom folks on there? Not really on live stream? Just after. Shabbat shalom.